Mark a little bit a couple weeks ago when we previewed the first four books of the Bible and kind of did a general overview of what's going on. And hey guys, you can pick you up a paper right there, and y'all can spread chairs around if you want to. If you need to spread out, feel free to move around. That's okay. But yeah, we want to just kind of review real quick about Mark. And so what we said in week 2, now we're in week 4, and what we said in week 2 was that Mark is the shortest gospel. Okay, it is the and when I say gospel, I mean letter about the gospel, the proclaiming the gospel. Mark is the shortest gospel, and it was written to the Roman church, the church in Rome. Okay, so that's who the audience is. John Mark is a guy that you see kind of early on in the book of Acts, and he doesn't have a really good, he's not really shown in a really good, because Paul and Barnabas, they have a conflict. Anybody remember the conflict between Paul and Barnabas? Paul went one way, Barnabas went the other. And if you remember that story, and you can go back and read it, it's in the book of Acts, go back and read that story, because that whole conflict is about this guy, John Mark. And John Mark is, he's a young man, and basically he just kind of abandons Paul. And so he's somewhat wishy-washy at this point in time. Yeah, you come on in. You guys can spread out. You just find a chair and you can spread out wherever you want to. So the story with John Mark is that he is wanting to go with them, but Paul says, no, we're not going to take you with us. We're going to say, John Mark, you're not going on this journey because you abandoned us. Yeah, you can pull some chairs out and around if you need to around here. So if you want to grab some chairs over here, and you can pull it out if you need to. I know they were kind of preset when we pulled in, so I know we might want to spread out some. So John Mark is in the book of Acts. He's not got a great entrance in the book of Acts because he winds up abandoning, running off. He's young, and so Paul says he's not going with me. All that comes full circle when you get to the letter of Timothy. What he's writing to Timothy, 2 Timothy, to be specific, is that you find where Paul writes and he says, send John Mark because he is useful to my mission. He is useful to what we've got going on. Hey, come on in. And so you see it kind of come full circle. This guy who was young and had issues, now Paul is saying, hey, bring John Mark. He's going to be integral to what I want to see happen. So John Mark is the writer here. We're pretty sure that's who that is of the in the book of Acts. The John Mark is referenced in the book of Acts. John Mark also becomes the secretary, basically, for Peter. Anybody remember Simon Peter? Simon Peter, kind of loud-mouthed Simon Peter. I mean, that may be a bad way to describe it, but he kind of likes to run his mouth a little bit, Simon Peter. But Simon Peter becomes the bishop or the head of the church of Rome, right? And so John Mark becomes his secretary. And what Mark is, the Gospel of Mark, is the story, is the eyewitness account of Peter given to John Mark. So John Mark not being an eyewitness to Jesus, Peter being an eyewitness, John Mark takes the story of Peter, and that's where we get the Gospel of Mark. All right, so Mark is, the Gospel of Mark, it's written to the Roman church, the church at Rome. Specifically, the church at Rome. All right? It is a quick read. It is the shortest of the first 4 books of the Bible. And if you read it, it's not only the shortest, but it has the quickest stories, the way it's presented. It's kind of like bam, 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 bam. If you read it, and even the verbiage and the wording that's used, you'll see words like, and immediately Jesus did this, and then he went and did this, and then it was like, it's just fast-paced. It's got a very different flow than Luke, than Matthew, and that's for the reason of who it's written to, is why it's different. All right, so now I said this last week. I said each gospel writer has an agenda. All right, they are not just writing for information. They are inspired through the Holy Spirit to give us the account. The gospel, and if you remember, the gospel is, it's a Greek word. It's euangelion, and so it means good news or good message. You might even see the angel word in there. What's an angel? An angel is a messenger. So it is the good news or the good message. A gospel is not just a biblical term. I know it seems like that. It just seems like, well, that's a Bible term. Gospel was in use before New Testament times. Gospel is basically, it means a herald. I don't know if any of you guys read newspapers. Anybody I've ever heard of, maybe the Miami Herald. Well, what's a herald? A herald was somebody who stepped out to proclaim a message. And so the gospel is the specific message of a king. The specific message, hey, there's a new king, and his kingdom is going to look like this. That's what gospel means, is that there's a new king, and his kingdom's going to look like this. And we know this because this word gets used with Caesar Augustus. There is a gospel, or a euangelion, for Caesar Augustus. And basically it's this whole list of things that Caesar Augustus, he's all these accolades. He is the Son of God. Okay? I mean, where have we heard that term before? Right? They proclaimed him as deity. Right? So he's the Son of God. He is, his kingdom is going to bring peace. And we talked about this a few weeks ago, so if you missed that, you can go back and catch that online. And so I don't want to rehash too much, but I just kind of want to catch some of you guys up to where we've been. So it's to the Roman Church. It's a very quick read in the sense of how the stories are told. It is the shortest of the first four. It is a subversive book. What do I mean by that? I mean that it's subversive. What does subversive mean? Anybody know what subversive? Give me your best definition for subversive. If you have a government and there's a subversive faction trying to overthrow that government, right? They're going against. So the book of Mark is a subversive book against the Roman Empire. You're going to see this when we get to chapter 15. It blows my mind away. So just hold on. We'll get there. It's a subversive literature or subversive book about a new kingdom and a new king. Well, they've already got a king with a kingdom. They've got the Caesar with the Roman Empire. We're good. We don't. No. There's a new king, and he's bringing about a new kingdom. And this is his gospel, his euangelion, about what his kingdom is going to look like. All right. So it's drawing a contrast in a way that announces a better king. That's what Mark. That's his agenda. Every writer of the first four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they all have agendas. It's not that they're just trying to give you a history. This is not history class. There's history in it. They're going to tell, but they have an agenda when they're writing to proclaim the gospel. That's what the gospel means. The gospel is an agenda-driven. That they want you to understand Jesus is not just information. Jesus is not just history. Jesus is a new king of a new kingdom. And so that's important for you to understand. Okay? Now, I don't know if you guys are into movies. There's a movie that came out several years ago, and yes, it's kind of it's a violent film. it was the movie Gladiator. But there is a scene in Gladiator, and it's not get what's going on. And I'm not turning the sound on. It's not because it's got anything bad in it. I just kind of want to narrate through it. So this idea of what you're going to see is the Roman emperor, Commodus. I can't remember his name, but his name is Commodus, riding into Rome, and this would be Roman procession for the triumphant entry of the emperor into Rome. He's got horses, chariots. It's lined with people. His military powers there. You even have people who may be dissenters, But the emperor is riding in, and this is his show of power. He's showing he's flexing his muscles, right? He is flexing his muscles as he's riding in with his entourage, all these horses, all these soldiers, all this military might. The senators come out to greet him. And so this is, when you talk about power to the Romans, what do you think they think about? This. This is their idea. When you say king and kingdom, what are they thinking about? This. When you're saying, hey, there's this new king that's going to come and bring victory, what are they thinking about? Yes. Yes. They're thinking about the Roman legion walking in. They're thinking about centurions who have swords and shields, and they are dressed for battle, and they are trained to kill. And so this is the depiction. This is it. This is kind of what they... since when I saw that, I thought, that's a great depiction right there of Rome. Yeah?
I'm sorry, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is that why Jewish people don't believe in Jesus? Because they think he was supposed to be king, take over freedom from everybody. But obviously he didn't freedom from the Romans. He freed them, from the sin, you know what I mean?
Right. And I can't speak for every Jewish person. And all these regions are ruled by Rome. So when they think of power, what are they thinking of? Yeah. I mean, the Roman Empire has spread out, and they're influenced through architecture, through language, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a second too. All that has kind of come in, and so the Jews have their own culture, and there's this friction, this colliding of cultures where they believe one way, but this depiction of Rome is a very enticing picture. It's a very enticing picture, and not only Rome. And so let's go ahead. That's a great question because it leads us into two different mindsets. So let me talk about that real quick. So you should have Jewish thought and Greek thought. Jewish thought is this. If you go read from the very outset of Genesis, that man is made in God's image. If you go read in Genesis, I think it's at the end of Genesis chapter 1, it flows into Genesis chapter 2, and it talks about, let us make man in our image and in our likeness. He created male and female, and so that's Jewish thought. Greek thought, and when I say Greek, I'm also meaning Roman, Greco-Roman. Because although the Romans came in and conquered the Greeks, the Greek culture conquered the Romans, basically. Yeah. And if you remember in history, a history lesson, you might remember the word Hellenism. Okay? That is the conquering of Greek culture around. So basically, Rome, they're the power, but they have adopted this Greek culture, Greek gods, Greek language. So if you were a 16, 17-year-old Roman, you would be trained in Latin and Greek. You would speak both languages. And so Greek thought is this. The dominating thought of Greek thought is the gods are made in man's image. There's a shift. There's a shift that happens where everything is God-centric, and not just for the Jews, but up until this period, you have all these nations, they have their gods, and everything is, where the Jews are concerned, it's one God, but even in the other cultures, their thought pattern is surrounded by the gods. Well, we got to serve the God. You know, that's what we're here for. Now, this Greek thought shifts it, and they still have a bunch of gods, but now it's different because now it's what the gods can do for them. And if you look at Greek architecture, if you look at Greek art, every Greek depiction of a god, it looks like what? It looks like people, right? It looks like people. If you go to look at these statues, Aphrodite, she's a woman, you know. Jupiter, it's a man. So there's all these depictions, and now they are making the gods in man's image. There's a shift, all right? And so Hellenism, it's the name for the culture and the worldview of the Greeks. It has the antithetically opposed to the God-centered worldview. So the Greek thought is opposed to the Jewish thought. And Jewish thought is God-centered. Greek thought is opposed to that. Okay. Hellenism makes the human being the ultimate reality. So Greeks, man becomes the center. Instead of God being the center, man becomes the center. All right? And this is how man becomes the center. The human mind is the basis for truth. The human body is the ultimate in wisdom. And the pleasure is the ultimate goal in life. It is the ancestor of modern humanism. So basically, truth resides with me. If I think it's true, it's true. You know, if it feels good, I should do that. You know, that's Greek thought. It's man-centered. And I think we see a lot of that today in our own culture.
That's why we sing.
Right?
We came back.
So, I mean, when you think about it, I think there's a reason. A lot of people, when you talk to them, is like, which gospel do you read the most? Or, you know, for Americans or in our culture, a lot of people would say Mark. Why is that? Because the way it's written in a way that appeals to a Greek, Greco-Roman mindset, which our culture is. We are influenced by that. Our culture is influenced by that. I want to give you this. There are 4 pillars of Greek society or Greco-Roman society. You have a kind of a box there, and you can kind of fill in this box. There's 4 pillars of society. So Greek worldview begins to revolve around ourselves, and a different set of priorities begin to emerge. The priority of power, the priority of pleasure, the priority of luxury, the priority of leisure, and comfort. Those priorities begin to emerge. But what are the 4 pillars? All right? What are the 4 pillars of Greek and Roman society? First off is education. And there's a place that they would go was called the gymnasium. I want to make sure I spell it right because I know I'm going to get criticized if I don't. The gymnasium. So what's the gymnasium? What's the gym? I went to the gym today. Anybody? Did you go to the gym? Right? It's a place to go work out, right? It's a place to go take care of your body. It's a place to go get in shape and get fit. All right, so gymnasium for us has a very narrow idea. Gymnasium at this time was a place where men went, yes, and they worked on their physical fitness. They did it in the nude. And it was a place where they would talk about philosophy. It was actually a place of education. So the gymnasium would be a place that people would go and be educated. Okay, so that's one of the pillars right there. The next pillar that you're going to see is the pillar of healthcare. They have these places called, and I'm going to butcher it. I think it's called if I'm saying it right, Asclepion. Asclepius was basically the god of healing. And so they had all these places built, these Asclepian places that people would go and they would burn incense to the god, and then they would go in, and it would be a priest, a doctor, a physician at that time, but a priest of the temple of Asclepius who would practice medicine. And so healthcare, people concerned about their health. So you'd have education is a pillar, healthcare is a pillar. Next one that you have is this. Entertainment. There's an N in there somewhere, right? Entertainment. Now, what is this? It's the theater. All right? Celebrities. That's people who get up and they act. And all this is going to come back to where we're at right now. So just hold on. Just hold on. You see a lot of this today. Okay? So don't think, well, that's 2,000 years ago. Nope, that's about 5 minutes ago. Okay? And right now. All right? So entertainment, theater is a pillar because they want people to laugh. They want people to enjoy. They want people to enjoy pleasure and leisure. Relax. The whole idea, this is it right here. Maybe you've heard the ads. Anybody remember what Burger King's slogan is? Have it your way. You deserve this today. You know what? Oh man, you need a me day, right? That whole mindset, that's great thought. That's what this is. Leisure. It's about who? It's man-centered. It's about humans, okay? And then lastly, you've got athletics. Anybody know how they celebrated athletics? Greek culture. Huh? Olympics! Yes! We still do the Olympics. Why? What is the Olympics? It is a competition, right? It is a competition. So you've got theater, you've got entertainment, you've got competition. They really like competition. What's that?
There is no warfare.
There's no
Pillars.
pillars. Yeah.
I don't see any place there for jobs or.
First, yeah. Well, and this is how this works out. So Alexander the Great. How does Alexander the Great? Remember Alexander the Great? Alexander the Great comes in. He's Greek. Before the Romans get there, he's Greek. And he conquers the world. How does he conquer the world? He goes in and he understands this. The world's too big for him to have an army in every nation, right? He can't just keep his army but thin out. So what does he do? He has to win those people over. How does he win those people over? Well, we're gonna educate you. How do you win those people over? Well, we're gonna help you be healthier. We have doctors. We have our way of medicine. So we're going to help you be healthier. We're going to educate you. We're going to help you be healthier people. We're going to entertain you. Remember the Colosseum? Remember what they did in the Colosseum? The gladiators, they would come out. Are you not entertained? They would come out and they would kill each other for sport. But the crowds would love it, and they were entertained because they loved it. And then athletics, competition, fighting. And so you would have guilds. There are guilds that people would have jobs and stuff. They would make, all kinds of things. And I'm blanking out. I like dyes and clothing and trade and all that stuff. They did have all that stuff. But this is the overarching thought. Because if you gain influence in these 4 areas, you don't have to keep an army there. You've won their hearts.
That's the agenda now.
So, do we see this today? Yeah. We can even look at our politics and see, when you look at politics, it doesn't matter. I'm not talking Democrats, Republicans, because this is on both sides. They'll both talk about education. They'll both talk about healthcare. They'll both use what? The media. What is media? Our media is not just people who get on and say, well, this happened today. No, everybody is a celebrity media person, and you have your celebrities that get in this, and entertainment, and then the last part, have you ever seen, an athlete stand up and say, well, I'm for this person, or I'm for this person. They want to get people on their side. Because all these pillars have influence. So what's that got to do with Mark? Well, this is the world that Mark is living in. And Mark has this agenda that this guy Jesus, who is not just a guy, he's the king of the world. He's the king of all creation. And Mark has this impression, I've got to tell this. I've got to tell this. So Mark's writing about AD 64, okay? So if Jesus is crucified somewhere around 30 AD, 33 AD, there's debate on that, probably around 33 AD. You're about 30, 31 years after Jesus has been crucified. And he's got to tell this story. He's wanting to tell this story. Peter has recounting what's going on. He's an eyewitness, and so Mark is writing it down. All right? I want to give you something real quick because it's going to play into where we're going here in just a second. Man, it's 7:30, and I got to nail this pretty quick. So there's a coronation. Anybody know what a coronation is? What's a coronation? Yeah, you're crowning a new king, right? Maybe anybody watched The Crown? Queen Elizabeth, her coronation, maybe you like that kind of stuff. Maybe you're into all the royal stuff, So a coronation is the crowning of a new king. Now, we don't have a ton of information about how all this came out, but we do have a lot on the coronation of Emperor Nero. Nero would have been about this time, crowned as emperor about this time. And so Nero, when his coronation, it's a process, it's a processional. It is kind of all the pomp and circumstance we saw in the video. There's this, he's coming in, that's kind of that idea. That's what this is. That's what a coronation is. So what was the steps of a coronation? Let me give you these real quick because this is going to play into where we're going to read. You have a legion is about 5,000 men. Then you have a cohort, which is about 500 men. Then you have another kind of division out of that, which is, I'm blanking out on what it's called. They're about 100 to 80 guys in that group, and over that group of 100 soldiers is a centurion. Maybe you've heard that word centurion. So think about this. Why is he a centurion? Because he's set over 100 soldiers. Does it sound like century?
Yes.
A century. So a centurion is the leader of 100 soldiers, roughly. All right? And so you have this Praetorian Guard gathers to hail Caesar as Lord. The next step is following behind Caesar as Caesar walked through this processional. There's this bull that's following behind him that's being led, and he's going to be the sacrifice during this coronation. And Caesar also carries the instrument of death. So if it's a dagger or a sword, Caesar has that. He is the one carrying the instrument of death for the sacrifice. Okay? Step 5. They arrive at the Capitoline Hill. Now, the Capitoline Hill was, if you know anything, anybody remember anything about Rome? Something about 7. Rome is built on 7 hills. All right? So if Rome is built on 7 hills in Italy. All right? And so Capitoline Hill is the head hill. Capital. Capita. Capita in Latin means head. So if you think about the word capital, our capital is in Washington. It is the head. That's where the head of our government's at. So they arrive at Capitoline Hill, and Caesar is offered wine mixed with what? Myrrh. Oh, we've heard of myrrh before, right? What did they bring Jesus at his birth? Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Yeah. So myrrh, as what we read, myrrh is mixed with wine to make a very expensive wine. When you mix it together, this becomes a very expensive wine. So apparently it's the really good stuff. Caesar is offered wine mixed with myrrh, but he refuses it and pours it out. Okay? The bull, remember the bull that's been followed, the bull is killed. Caesar pronounced death or life on a host of prisoners. So they have prisoners that's there at this coronation, and for Caesar to say, you know what, I want to show you my power. How much power do I really have? I have the power of life and death. So Caesar would look at him and said, you live. And he'd go to the next person and says, you die. That's it. You live, you die. He just wants to display his power over life and death. So Caesar pronounced life and death on a host of prisoners, demonstrating that he has the power of life and death. The emperor ascends the steps of the temple with the high priest on his right and his commander on his left. So he's got two people flanking him. All right? That as he ascends these steps, he's got one on his right, one on his left. Caesar is acclaimed the Lord and God. Caesar, when Jesus was born, and in his euangelion, years before Jesus is born, in that euangelion, that proclamation of Caesar Augustus, he's called the Son of God. Because they all have this Caesar worship, this cult of Caesar worship. They believed that they were divine, that they were gods. And so Caesar is acclaimed as Lord and God as people sing his praises. And they wait for a sign from the heavens. In Nero's coronation, according to history, there was an eclipse. Now, you can predict when an eclipse, right, is going to happen. People can, if you're knowledgeable in science, you can predict when that happens. So, however they did this, I'm sure that they might have set this up to say, let's do it on this point at this time, right? Because that would just display my power, right? I have power over life and death, and I have power over the elements, the sun. All right, enough of Nero. Let's go to let's go to Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15, beginning in verse 16. And I want to read this, and I want you to keep, I gave it to you on your paper, so you should have this on your paper. That whole, the coronation of Nero. I want you to keep that handy. Beginning in verse 16. And the soldiers led him inside the palace. That is the governor's headquarters. And they called together the whole battalion. Now, the battalion was about 500. It was about 500 people. Okay, 500 soldiers. That's a lot of soldiers. A lot of soldiers. Why would they do that for Jesus? Jesus, who is a common person in their estimation, why would they do this to make a mockery of him? And that's it, to make a mockery of him. All right? And they called together the whole battalion. And they clothed him in what? Purple was the color of royalty. Purple, actually, if you go read, I was listening to a podcast. It's called, it was about the entire line of the emperors. And they call it being born to the purple. When a new emperor is born, or their lineage, one that's going to become emperor, they call it being born to the purple. When you're born to the purple, you're born into this
royal lineage. And so this is it. They clothed him in a purple cloak. And twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on him. Does this sound familiar? Or is it looking like some steps that you've seen before? And they began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews! Not because they believed it. It's because they wanted to mock him. It's because they wanted to make fun of him. It's because they wanted to deride him and just cast derision all through this idea of him being some kind of king. Hail, King of the Jews! And they were striking his head with a reed and spitting on him and kneeling down in homage to him. Saying, oh, great king, and then they would hit him. Oh, great king, and then they would smack him again. It was brutal. And when they had mocked him, they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. The Romans did not invent crucifixion. I think it was the Persians that actually invented crucifixion, but the Romans are the one that perfected it. That's how brutal they are. They are the ones, they loved death, they loved violence, and that's how they ruled. They kept, I'll tell you this a lot. There's a thing called the Pax Romana. The Pax Romana is the peace of Rome. That's what that means. And how did they keep the peace? They kept the peace through violence, through fear, through heavy-handedness. Very different from the kingdom of Jesus. He talks about bringing peace too, but he's not talking about bringing it through violence, right? It's a very different kingdom. And so they mocked him and they stripped him of the purple cloak and put his own clothes on him, and they led him out to crucify him. And they compelled a passerby, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming in from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus. And I think you see these guys' names pop up later on, and which is interesting to me, that these names pop up later on in some of the epistles. And you just wonder what this day did for them and their father. So this guy, Simon of Cyrene, was compelled to carry his cross, carry the cross of Jesus. Jesus maybe having a tough time carrying it, and so the Roman soldiers pulled him out. And you could not say no to a Roman soldier. They had this thing that if Roman soldiers were stationed in your town, they could come to your house and stay in your house. You had to give them room and you had to give them board. You could not refuse them. If they requested something of you, you had to give it up. And so there were many towns that would cry out to the governor, please, don't let your soldiers stay here because they're a burden on our town. And so, Simon, hey, come here. No, not me. You don't have the choice, buddy. Come on. You're going to carry this cross. The father of Alexander and Rufus carried his cross. And they brought him to the place called Golgotha, which means place of the skull. Now, maybe you've heard of the term Mount Calvary. Anybody ever heard of Calvary? Not the Calvary riding in a horse, but Mount Calvary. Mount Calvary is a place so that is a Latin term, which is connected with the idea of head. Right? So remember where the Caesar would go to? Where would the Caesar go to he would go where? To Capitoline Hill, which means the head hill. Where is Jesus led to be crucified? Skull Hill. Or Calvary, the Latin term is head hill. So he's led to this place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull. And they offered him what? Wine mixed with myrrh. Now, there is this, a lot of people will point to this and say, well, this is one of those contradictions in the Gospels, another Gospel says that Jesus was offered wine on the cross. Jesus is not on the cross here. This is before Jesus gets to the cross. Right? And both can be correct, actually. He can be offered wine at two different times. If you look at when Jesus is offered wine on the cross, it's very different. Because at that point in time, he's offered wine on a hyssop branch. And the hyssop branch which they would have taken hyssop branch and had stuck a sponge on it with this wine. What I didn't realize was this. Hyssop branch was also used as toilet paper. So think about that. Think about that. Think about how they've degraded him. They've beat him. They've whipped him. And now here, you're thirsty. Oh, here you go. Let's wrap it up in some toilet paper. Here you go. Have a big long drink, Jesus. Wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him and divided his garments among them, casting lots for them, and they decided what each should take. And it was the third hour when they crucified him. I think that was about the third hour would be, does anybody have a note in your Bible to 9 o'clock? All right. So it's about the third hour. So this is in the morning. All right. And so third hour when they crucified him. And the inscription of the charge against him, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. Do you see what's going on here? Mark has an agenda. Now, he doesn't have to make stuff up. Who is his audience? It's the church at Rome. It's people who would know Caesar. It's people who would know Roman culture. It's people who would not only know Roman culture, they would appreciate Roman culture. They loved Roman culture. They thrived on Roman culture. They loved power. They loved the leisure. They loved all 4 of these pillars. They loved it. This was their culture. They were wrapped up in it. And so what Mark has to do is Mark is taking this story and he is contrasting it with their picture of what power is. And he's saying, no, there's a true king. And the true king comes into power in a very different way. The true king gives liberty in a very different way. The true king is going to bring health to you in a very different way. The true king talks about peace, but he doesn't use violence to get it. And so those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days. Remember, Jesus walked by the temple. He says, tear this down, I'll build it back in 3 days. And their temple, if you remember, we talked about temple. Temple was a big deal to these guys. That's where God resided. So Jesus was talking about getting rid of the temple. It's interesting if you go to the book of Revelation, where there is a New Jerusalem. Do you find a temple? It's interesting because it's absent there. Who's the temple? So Jesus talks about, or Paul talks about us becoming the temple of the Holy Spirit in the New Testament. And then when we get to this new creation, there's no physical temple there, but Jesus is there. And Jesus is the light in the city. It's this. It all points to Jesus. Oh man, guys, this is good. Man, I was just, when I was listening, I was like, oh my gosh, this is good stuff. All right, so I'll rebuild it in 3 days. Save yourself and come down from the cross. They're just pouring it on. So also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, he saved others, cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe. And those who were crucified with him also reviled him. And when the 6th hour had come, which, anybody got what's the 6th hour? About 3 o'clock. Yep. About 3 o'clock, there was what?
Eclipse.
It was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. So there's about a 3 hour
That's crazy.
eclipse. Do you think they set this up just so that they could crucify Jesus at this time? Do you think Nero had to set up his own coronation so it would coincide with an eclipse, so he could show how much power he had. But then when the true king gives his life, he moves heaven and earth. And it goes at his bidding. It goes at his command. There's a contrast. That's what Mark is about. Mark is giving it, and I know we've skipped 14 chapters in Mark to get to this. Go back and read. If you go back and read, and this is what stood out. If you've been in you've been reading through the Gospels with us on the YouVersion app, that was one of the comments that I made. We're supposed to be just commenting after we read, and right after we started Mark, I just like the first 3 chapters of Mark. Just go and see how many times it talks about authority. Look at how many times it moves very quickly. The stories, immediately Jesus went here, he did this, and then he went here, then he did this. Pick up on that. Then look at every place where it talks about authority. And look at every place where it talks about him confronting demon possession. And that in and of itself to me says he's confronting a rogue kingdom. What did Paul say? Paul said this. He says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against power in high places. What is principality? That's talking about supernatural beings. It's talking about kingdoms that are set up on earth that rebel against God. He says that's what we're wrestling against. And when Jesus comes on, and this is not the first time that happens. If you go read back in the Old Testament, when God led the children of Israel out of Egypt, one of the first places they stopped when they came out was this mountain. And this mountain, if you go read it, it was a mountain that was referenced to another god. And it's almost like God stops his kids right there at the foot of this mountain and says, oh, this mountain is supposed to belong to this god. I think it's Beelzephon, if I'm not mistaken. If you can go read, look that up. I could be wrong, but he brings them to the foot of this mountain, and he begins to reveal who he is at the foot of this mountain. Because when they're coming out, he's just confronting. He's like, you think you've heard about the gods of Egypt. You think you understand what gods really are. You think you understand what power is. You thought you saw power in Egypt. Let me show you what true power is. Same thing has happened right here, where it's the same type of kingdom that gets confronted. It's just a different generation of it. This happens all through Scripture. All these rogue kingdoms get confronted. At some point in time, the rogue kingdoms of the world, the rebellious kingdoms of the world will be confronted by God. And they will stand accountable. America included, guys. And so, we can't say, well, we do a lot of things in America that displease God. Now, praise God, I'm hoping that while the church is still here, that there's salt and light, right? That's what Jesus talked about. It says, well, there's salt and light here. You're the salt of the earth. You're a light that's set up on a hill. It's not to be hidden. So while we're here, we have a job to do. What is Mark's job? Mark's job was to shine that light in Rome. Mark's job was to be salt in Rome, because there's a rogue kingdom, there's a rogue king being confronted. You rule in a very different way than I do, Caesar. And I'm bringing about a new kingdom. Nero, like all great men, you know what he did? He died. He died. Jesus lives.
Amen.
Jesus lives. And if you go read the end of the book of Mark, just go read. And they believe, and I don't know how yours is, if you go to the end of Mark, let's just turn over there real quick. I don't know if yours has a footnote in it. Mine has a footnote in it here that everything beyond verse 8 is not in the oldest manuscripts. And so they believe that might have just kind of been tagged on at the end, because if you read how Mark ends, how does Mark end? Let's just read this real quick. Mark chapter 16, verse 1. You don't have this, Taylor, so don't look at it. Don't try to look for it. It says, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early, this is verse 2 of chapter 16 in Mark. Yep, verse 2 of chapter 16 of Mark. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb, and they were saying to one another, who will roll the stone away for us from the entrance of the tomb? And looking up, they saw the stone had been rolled back, and it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting at the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. I think that is an understatement. They were alarmed, and he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, and who has risen. He is not here. For the place where they have laid him, But go and tell his disciples, Peter, that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, and trembling and astonishment had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. It's interesting, if that's the end where Mark truly ended, if that's the earliest manuscript stopped there. It's interesting that he ends like that. It's very kind of abrupt, right? It's kind of like it leaves you hanging. What's the rest of the story? But remember, I think that can be very intentional. Who's his audience? And the Romans are enamored with excitement. They are drawn to entertainment, the theater. He's captured their attention. He's captured their attention with this story of this true king, of the real king. So that's Mark. Questions, comments? It's crazy when you look at this stuff. Guys, when you begin to take some of this, a lot of it, the Bible is not written outside of history. All right? So even though I started off and I said Mark is not a history book, it's set in history, it's written in history, it is historical, but when you begin to overlay these stories, if you go read the book of Revelation, same thing happens. And Revelation doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense. But if John is writing to a group of people who are being persecuted in the Roman Empire, and you go take the emperor at that time is thought to be Domitian. Now, there's some debate about when Revelation was written. But many scholars believe that Domitian was the emperor. If you go look at the story of Domitian and the stuff that he does, it's almost like you take a transparency and lay it right over Revelation, because you begin to see some of these same things. It's like John begins to draw contrast between who is the ruling emperor at that time on earth, but just reminding the Christians, don't give up. It's not about Domitian. It's about Jesus. The book of Revelation is about Jesus being the king. It's about Jesus being the victor. Mark, it's about Jesus as being king and becoming king a very different way than Nero. So the contrast. So, do you pick up on that when you're reading Mark? Does it seem different than some of the other Gospels to you? To me, it does. I don't know if you picked up on that. If not, go back and read it again. Go back and read Matthew, and then go read Mark. Very different worlds. Why? Because if you remember last week we talked about Matthew. Who's Matthew written to? Matthew's not written to Romans in Rome. Matthew is written to Jews in Jerusalem. So he's got a lot of Jewish culture in that. And that comes back to your question earlier, why the Jews reject Jesus. Matthew would have had that agenda of saying, hey guys, this is who the Messiah is. Don't miss it. It's littered through the Old Testament. Don't miss the signs. That's Matthew's agenda. Mark has a different agenda. It's all about Jesus. It's all about Jesus' gospel, euangelion, Jesus being proclaimed as the new king with a new kingdom. Every one of these gospels has got the same focus. They come at it in different ways because they're writing to a different audience. All right. All right. So no questions, comments. We'll wrap up here. And thank you. If anybody's joining us online, thank you for joining us tonight. But let's pray. And if you guys want to ask questions afterward, we'll stick around and do that. Father, thank you, Lord, for your word. Thank you for the gospel in Mark. Thank you that Mark is drawing a contrast between fake kingdoms and the real king. Rebellious kings and the true king. The king of our heart, the king of the world, the king of the universe. Lord, that's what we declare you as being the king of our heart. You are the king of this universe. And we just give you honor tonight because your word is true. And we want to take your word and just apply it to our life. We want to take your word and be encouraged by it. We want to take your word and let it build in us and overflow out of us to friends and family. God, let your word just come alive in us. So we thank you for this time, and we just ask your blessing on it.